Hello, hello. Real quick before we get into the episode, a simple request. If you like this episode, if you like any of the episodes we put out every single week, we would absolutely love it if you would share it with one friend. That's it. Just send them a text, send them an email, mention it next time you see them at the gym. Let them know that they may also like chasing excellence. There's no better way for us to grow our crew here at the show than if folks like you who are already listening share it with somebody who should be here. So if you've got a friend who's not listening, please consider sending them this episode or any of your favorite episodes. We thank you in advance. Okay, let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to the show. I am Patrick. I'm excited for you to be here. I'm excited for this conversation. I am joined by Rebecca Newberger Goldstein. How are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Oh, good. I'm happy to have you here. A little bit of bio on you for folks. So we got a little bit of context. You're a philosopher and a novelist. And I kind of want to talk to you about what it means to be a philosopher these days. We may get to that. You're a MacArthur Fellow for your work dramatizing the concerns of philosophy through imaginative storytelling. You are the recipient of the National Humanities Award, awarded by President Obama for bringing philosophy into conversation with culture. You are the author of 11 books spanning philosophy and fiction. And the book we're going to talk about today, recently released, it's called The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. Thank you so much for being here, Rebecca.
A pleasure.
I'm excited to talk to you about this idea about the mattering instinct. And specifically, what I really wanted to talk to you about was a concept or an idea inside the book that you've called mattering projects. I'm a sucker for the word project. So like it immediately stuck out at me. And as I was reading, I kept highlighting anything that where you were writing about projects. So I'm hoping that we can spend most of our time today talking about what that is, why it matters, and what we can do with the concept once we have a decent sense of it. So what are mattering projects and how does it fit into this broader conversation in the book about what you've called the mattering instinct?
Yeah. So maybe I should start with that. And maybe I should even start with saying what I mean by mattering.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a word we use all the time. It's a noun, matter, the very stuff of the universe. And then we have this verb, to matter, that we apply to questions of what matters and who matters. And maybe most urgently in our lives, do I matter?
Mm,
Right. I call this the mother question of all mattering questions. And it really motivates us to think about what matters and making for a life that matters because we don't want to waste this one and only life. So, and that's the mattering instinct pretty much.
hmm
That Freud had said that there are two cornerstones to our humanness, love and work.
Yep.
And I would amend that to connectedness.
Respectfully.
Respectfully, thank you for adding that. To connectedness, that we're gregarious creatures. We evolved from gregarious creatures. I've spent a lot of time in Africa watching chimpanzees. And
Mm,
in some ways, I recognize so much that we have in common with the chimpanzees, especially, the gregariousness, the
yeah.
fact that there are certain members of our species who we need to have in our lives, who are paying us attention whether we deserve it or not. That's our sociability, our connectedness. And psychologists have paid an awful lot of attention to that. But in addition to that, this one species, I think on all the earth, maybe not in all the universe, but on all the earth, has this additional requirement aside from needing to matter to others, to be paid attention to by special others, is this mattering instinct, which involves justifying. Here's where the notion of justifying comes in, being deserving of not the attention of others, but our own attention. And that seems almost paradoxical at first. We just naturally pay attention to ourselves all the time, incessantly. There's what the cognitive neuroscientists call the default network mode when we're not paying attention to external reality. What are we doing? We're mostly fantasizing, daydreaming about ourselves. So, it's the default, and we can't carry on. No creature can carry on its life, an evolved creature that has attention, unless it's paying the bulk of its attention to itself. But we alone have this self reflective capacity. We can step outside of ourselves and ask, Yeah, and see this self-mattering, this paying so much attention to the self, and ask, "Eh, why? Who am I? Am I deserving of it?" If we measure how much something matters by how much attention we pay to it, then we would each seem to esteem ourselves the thing that matters the most in all the world, and short of lunacy, we don't. We realize that we are not, the most important thing in all the world. And it's that kind of shock. It's an existential shock, and it's a more philosophical than psychological shock because it causes us to think in terms of justification, of norms of justification, of values, which I think comes very, very naturally to us because of this mattering instinct, this need to try to, in some way, to justify the how seriously we take ourselves, how much attention we give ourselves. Yeah. So that's the mattering instinct. And it's so hidden in us that it takes some work to get people to see it. And I know this because I've been talking to people about this for decades, and mostly because I'm so interested in how people respond to this need for self-justification and bringing these values into their lives. And that's where I get into mattering projects. It has to do with the great diversity, which is astounding, the degree of diversity, real diversity, that we bring to this common longing to somehow ground all this attention that we pay to ourselves and prove to ourselves that we matter. We may use the attention of others to prove it to ourselves, but most ultimately, we're trying to prove it to ourselves. And if you don't have intimate connections, people in your life, the kind of things of mattering to others. If you don't have that, we know what the result is. It's the pain of loneliness. If you don't have a way of justifying your self-mattering to yourself, the pain is actually a sense of, really, meaninglessness, lack of purpose, lack of coherence in your life, and in the worst case scenarios, and I've spent a lot of time talking to people who suffer from this, depression, clinical depression, whose characteristic statement is, "I don't matter." "I don't my life makes no sense. I might as well not be here," and along with suicidal ideation. So it's deep, and most of us have it can keep it hidden because our mattering projects are working for us. So our mattering projects, our response to this longing to matter, but they are myriad. It's amazing that I come up, that there's and this is an idea I came with over 40 years ago, the mattering map, like just all the regions of the map, ways that, a tattoo artist, just one example that I was waiting for my husband in a lobby of a Manhattan hotel. This was quite some years ago, and guy comes up to me, he's trying to pick me up, and I start talking to him about his mattering project. He's a pickup artist. That is his project. That's it. But it's basically, what we use to bury this question. Do I matter? So and a successful mattering project is one that makes one feel like, your life is meaningful in your own eyes and there's purpose, there's coherence. So the notion of meaningfulness for me is derivative of the first you have to understand what mattering is, why we want to ground it, and out of that comes these mattering projects, and out of that, we can define what a meaningfulness and lack of meaning is. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. I wanna go back just a little bit to what you were talking about with well, 2 things. 1, you have been thinking about this and working on this in some shape or form for many, many years, as you alluded to. I think you said that the first book you wrote was a book of fiction, and it was the spark of this idea was in there, and you've been my word, not yours, but you've been wrestling with it ever since, and the sort of the
We are
culmination of
wrestling.
is this is that's the right word? Is the culmination of it is this book. And so I wanna bring that up because I think that's really interesting, and as you've had these conversations over the years and as this idea has continued to inspire more thought and more work from you, is the thing that people I don't want to say struggle with, but is the surprising part of this the fact that we are always trying to justify the attention that we give ourselves, because I think, like, again, you sort of said it, but I think we can all admit we spend entirely too much time thinking about ourselves and acting, or at least thinking about ourselves as the center of the universe, even if almost nobody would say, I am in fact the center of the universe and I deserve. So it's the justification that is the point of tension.
It is, and it's hard to yeah, and because that, justification, that's the stuff of philosophy.
Mm.
That's, values and all that, and what I'm really contending is in some sense, we are not as shallow as we seem. Even the shallowest among us is not as shallow that you dig and you find, yeah, there is at the heart this need to justify ourselves in our own eyes. And the Mentoring Project, and we can change our Mentoring Project. And in fact, as you were asking the question, it just occurred to me that I really changed my Mentoring Project tremendously. I came into philosophy from the exact sciences. I was a math physics person. And then I became very, very interested in foundations of physics. Quantum mechanics did me in, that was where I was bugging my physics professor asking him, "What does this all mean? How do I attach this theory to this Byzantine theory to a world that's recognizably like ours?" And he kept saying, "No, shut up and calculate," basically is what what he told me. And that's not why I got into physics. I wanted to know what the world was like. And he finally said, "Go talk to the philosophers." And I was at Columbia, and I did, and so, yeah, that was really what I was interested in, and I went into philosophy of science, and was, in fact, supported as a graduate student by a National Science Foundation fellowship, even though it was philosophy, so it was sort of very technical sort of stuff. And then I got my first job as an assistant professor, and I had been through a really, existentially charged life, fraught first year. I had lost my very beloved father, who was my hero, and I had given birth to my first child. And suddenly I was thinking, "What's my life about? What's it all about? What am I doing here?" And I'm a philosopher. I didn't know how to grieve for my father, and I didn't know how to bring up a child, really. Um, and and I was a philosopher. I had a doctorate in philosophy, and that didn't seem to be giving me any help here in these big questions of how do I face these new challenges in my life? And how do I partition what I have to give my child from what I have to do to get on with my career and all of that kind of thing. And I found myself suddenly hearing a voice. I'm often asked what it's like to be married to a genius. I was married to a very smart man, was my first husband. He's a very brilliant physicist named Sheldon Goldstein. That's where I got his last name. But I had never been asked. We were both very young. I had never been asked what it was like to be married to a genius. I knew this was the first line. Either I was going mad and, you know, had made the transition from neurotic to psychotic. I was hearing voices talking to me in my head, or it was the first, line of a novel, and I chose to believe it was the second, that it was the first line of a novel.
That's a safer bet. Yeah, that's a safer road to go down.
Yes, right. And it was really an interesting adventure into another subjectivity, quite different from mine, interested in philosophy, but in much more what I would call back in those days, murkier, more, messy, existential type of questions. But anyway, and I was able the editor of that book, who went on he was also very young, he went on to be a legendary editor, Jonathan Colossi, asked me at our first meeting, he said, he had bought the novel and he liked it. He said, "But I really don't understand your main character. She's very good looking, she's very bright, she's very sexually attractive, she has lots of affairs, and, that sort of gets the plot going, but she's so unhappy. She's always on the edge of despair." And I thought about that, and then I heard her in her voice saying, "Yeah, I because I don't matter in the way that I most want to matter." And that was like a key insight for me, that we have these different ways of needing to matter. If what most mattered to her in feeling that she mattered was being found sexually desirable by tons of men and have to sort of fight them off, she would have not been in despair, but that was not the region of the mattering map in which she lived. She lived in a region where she really it was, ideas that most mattered to her. She wanted to make a contribution in some way to the world of ideas in order to, feel like she mattered, and she didn't really feel capable of it. She was filled with self-doubt and hence despair. And so she marries what she wanted to be. She marries the man of genius, a mathematical genius, and yeah. And that was not very satisfying either, and hence the novel. But it was an insight. Yeah, it was insight. I thought a general insight into human nature, but I forgot about it, and I forgot about the Mattering map, which I felt like was kind of a vague idea, was a was something that my fictional character would come up with, not me. So, I have to say that this really freed me in a way, and that's why I don't poo-poo novels. My colleagues did, and my philosophical career, in fact, took quite a hit because, oh my god, she's supposed to be a philosopher of physics, and here she is writing a sexy novel, and that was a but it turned out to be for me, and what turned out to be my mattering project, which was to figure out mattering in our species. It turned out to be a really important move, which is another thing to bear in mind that sometimes, the way to finding your true mattering project, the one that's going to lead to your I don't know, to the most your most interest in your own life, the thing that really keeps you going and interested and engaged in your own life, but also might prove helpful to other people. Two aspects, I think, of a successful mattering project, certainly not undermining other people. That is a bad aspect, even if it's serving oneself. So there's a certain moral aspect that goes into this as well. But first and foremost, it has to keep you as far away from existential despair as possible. Make you feel as if what you're doing is, in your eyes, justifying your attention to yourself enough so that you can live with yourself 24/7, as we are condemned to do.
We're brought to you by David Protein, the bar that delivers more protein for fewer calories than any leading bar on the market. I grab a David bar almost every single morning. A bar plus a couple pieces of fruit has become kind of my go-to start for the day. And if I can land 20 to 30 grams of protein before 9 a.m., I know the rest of my nutrition is set up to succeed. David has two lines: Gold, which has 28 grams of protein, 150 calories, zero sugar, and Bronze, which has 20 grams of protein, still 150 calories, still zero sugar. The Gold bars hit 75% of calories from protein. Bronze comes in at about 53%, both of them well above the industry average, which comes in around 40%. David is offering our listeners a special deal. Buy 4 cartons and get a fifth for free when you go to davidprotein.com/excellence. That's davidprotein.com/excellence. And if you prefer to shop in person, David is available at Target, Walmart, Kroger, Wegmans, and the Vitamin Shop. Just check their store locator to find a location near you. We are sponsored this time around by Warby Parker, the brand that has completely reimagined what it feels like to buy quality eyewear. I will be honest, I never really cared about what kind of sunglasses I wore, but I recently decided that I was going to be a grown-up and actually get a great pair, and I ended up at Warby Parker. Before I even ordered, I fell down a rabbit hole on their virtual try-on feature. You just point your phone, or in my case, my computer, at my face and tried on a dozen frames. I spent way too long doing it, but I landed on the Perkins LBF in black matte Eclipse. They just showed up and I love them. Beyond sunglasses, Warby Parker carries prescription glasses starting at just $95, contacts, online eye exams, and more, all in one single place. Our listeners get 15% off plus free shipping when they buy 2 or more pairs of prescription glasses at warbyparker.com/excellence. That's 15% off when you buy 2 pairs of glasses at warbyparker.com/excellence. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support the show and tell them that we sent you. We are brought to you by Cozy Earth, a brand on a mission to elevate the everyday through better materials and the kind of quality that reshapes small moments. February has us thinking about the ways we could take care of ourselves, and few investments quietly pay off more than better sleep. Sleep is one of the 5 factors we come back to on the show all the time, and the environment you sleep in matters more than most people ever realize. Cozy Earth makes sleepwear and home goods from viscose, from bamboo, and the difference in feel is real. Their bamboo pajama set sleeps cooler than cotton and helps you fall asleep faster, stay comfortable longer. Their classic cuddle blanket is richly plush, the kind of comfort you reach for every single night. I promise you, you will do that. Both come with a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty. Share a little extra love this February and wrap yourself or somebody you care about in comfort that truly feels special. Go to cozyearth.com. Use the code excellence for up to 20% off the whole site. And if you get a post-purchase survey, be sure to mention that you heard about Cozy Earth right here on the show. Celebrate everyday love with comfort that makes the little moments count. I want to ask you more about the Mattering map, but first, you have in the book, you have a lot of really wonderful stories of people, and you tell the story through the lens of their particular Mattering project. Is there one? I love the one you just gave us of yours, but is there another one from the book that would demonstrate what a Mattering project could look like? Again, I think we're going to get into the hows and the whys of why a Mattering project for a certain kind of person works. But is there one from the book that would be a good illustration of what a Mattering project could look like?
Yeah. Well, what do you think of the Frank Mink story?
He's the what is the word I'm looking for? The skinhead, former skinhead.
Yeah,
Yes,
former neo-Nazi.
please, yes.
And I mean, he's of all the people I ever spoke to, I mean, the one who really impressed me the most because he made the most transformation that I've ever experienced, learn about. So he is really very interesting to me. So a subtitle of my book is, yes, How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us, and I think I explained a little bit about that, and divides us, and that is such an important aspect, especially we're living in very, big news headlines. We're living in very polarized times, we are extraordinarily divided from each other, and a lot of these divisions come from the different regions of the Mattering map that have become, like armed camps, hostile camps, viewing each other adversarially. And I wanted an example of somebody who really sees their Mannering, project in terms of really adversarial. It's my kind of Mattering against these others. So and I wanted to speak to, have a deep and heartfelt, empathetic conversation with an incel or with, an anti-Semite, a neo-Nazi, a skinhead, somebody of this sort. I reached out, I was very much online, doing research on various people. I reached out to many people, and not surprisingly, given my gender, given my ethnic background, whatever, I didn't get anybody answering
Mhm.
me. And there's nothing like a real conversation. I can read up and read up and read up, but I really like a real conversation. And finally, there was this guy, Frank Mink. He was a former neo-Nazi skinhead, and he immediately called me back. And I was in Boston. He lived outside of LA. I flew out to speak to him, and he was fascinating. So, first of all, it was he understood the language of Mandarin completely. He's a very smart guy. But you don't have to be smart to understand this. You have to be human. You have to be in touch with your humanist to understand this. And he had come from a really rough beginnings. He had been born into really the mean streets of Philadelphia. His mom was a drug addict. His father abandoned him. His stepfather was a brute, would beat him up, and what felt he was sort of a competitor in the household, wouldn't even allow him to eat in the same room as him. And he felt like shit. He just felt like shit. I mean, and he said that he would could drop out of he dropped out of school in 8th grade, and but when he was walking home from school, he would try to get hit by a car, this is where the mattering instinct is going incredibly badly, and also, I would say, connectedness also. Well, he spent, this summer with, an aunt and uncle who lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Amish country, and of all things, he met a well-organized group of neo-Nazis there. It was not Amish people. It was not Amish, neo-Nazis. And they told him, and they actually used this language. They were very impressed with him because he had actually and he was in gangs, and he had beaten up Black people, Puerto Rican people, people non-white people, and they were very impressed with that because they were neo-Nazis, but they had never met. It was all white there. So they said, "Look into the mirror, and you will see that you matter. You are a white, male, heterosexual American. These others are taking your mattering away from you." And that's a type of conceiving of your mattering, and it's filled with resentment, aggrievement. It's a very zero-sum notion of mattering to this the extent here it was groups of people, but it can be on an individual level to the extent that certain people are rising, you are descending. They are taking what was rightfully yours. And he became a very that's when he dropped out of school. He became a full-time active member, organizer, very he has a lot of creativity, and he poured it into this project, this mattering project of trying to write the topsy-turvy mattering that had taken hold as what they called mud people, people of color, are rising and women are rising, taking away what was was rightfully theirs, and that's why their lives are going so bad, and so he gave his all to that. He did very bad things, he'd be the first person to tell you. He was, convicted of, kidnapping and torture at age of 17, was sent to a grown-up prison, and it was there that the first chinks in this really well-defended ideology that was bolstering up that sense of mattering, and that had been formed into his mattering project. The first chink in his armor came in prison when he bonded very tightly with 2 Black guys there. They were all worrying about whether their women outside were gonna remain faithful to them, and, as Frank said, there ain't nothing more human than guys inside worrying about their women being faithful outside, and they would read the letters from their girlfriends to each other and parse them, and what does this really mean? So, he was really bonded, and by the time he got out, his some aspects of his ideology were faltering, but he still hated Jews. He said that he hated Jews all the more because it was the one thing that tied him to his former ideology, and he had a great big, swastika on the side of his neck, tattoo wreathed with flames, and his knuckles spelled out skinheads, and when he beat people to a pulp, they would know why they were being beaten up, and he couldn't find a job. 8th grade dropout, ex-felon, swastika on the neck, "Yeah, this guy seems right for let's hire this guy. Yeah, he seems like good in human resources," right? So and one guy hires him, and he happens to be a Jewish guy, and he's a antique had an antique shop, a high-end antique shop, and and he bonded with with this guy, and this guy, when he first went to get paid, the guy wasn't in the shop, and Frank thought, "Yeah, he's gonna Jew me." Yeah, he'd always heard that phrase, "Jewing somebody," meaning gypping them. A gyp, same thing, comes from gypsy, right? Cheating them out of money. And no, he didn't. He gave him a bond and he got a bonus, and he hired him. And they had a really amazing relationship. And so he had to rebuild himself, that the old ideology and what the New Mannering Project was really doing, in some sense, penance for his first part of his life. He works to try to talk people out of their hateful ideology, and an ideology that's just based on resentment, aggrievement, hate, anger, and that's what his life has been about. So this is to me, it's like from one mattering project to the other, this is an extraordinary transformation.
Yeah. To your point earlier, it's also a good reminder that mattering projects can change. And sometimes in the case of Frank, should have changed, right?
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
think would say the world is a better place.
Yeah.
I know my life is a better place. I mean, my relationship with Frank is very important to me. He's
Yeah.
my friend. So many people, and the ideologies that make you feel really antagonistic and resentful, and these are not happy emotions. you may need them very much. And just let me say that Frank, and he would again be the first person, he has a tremendous amount of self-honesty, as you must, to have made the journey that he's made and is still making. He still battles his demons. You don't have come from a childhood like Frank's and not have your internal demons, and he's the first to say so. I'm not saying it's a happily ever story. There have been a lot of setbacks, but he keeps pushing on, and and just it's surprisingly enough, because I wasn't brought up to have the kind of life that I lead, but I've met amazingly impressive people in my life, Nobel laureates, quite a few. President Obama, he gave me that medal. Does anybody impress me more than Frank? No.
Mm,
No.
really interesting. I want to go back to what you mentioned before, the mattering map. You write this: our location on the mattering map influences the mattering projects that we undertake, which, in channeling our longing to matter, propel us into our future, giving us a reason to live. So there's two little bits in there that I'd love to unpack with you. The first is that the first few words there, which is our location. And then the second, of course, is the mattering map. Our location on the mattering map. Can you talk to us a little bit about the four mattering strategies that you've come up with in your conversations and in your research and in all your reading, in terms of like where we sort of live on this mattering map? Can you just describe that visual for us, perhaps?
Yeah, and because I wanted to make it very visual, I even sketch in the beginning of the book, the Mattering map surrounded by the sea of longing, and longing is for me a very important word because, we're never really sure whether we matter, no, right? We gotta make the leap, and that's true too. I've known many people who have trouble landing on a mattering project sometimes, and this has been true for some of my students, because they have too many interests, too many talents, too much passion, and they're stymied, they're not going forward. They're caught in indecision. So, but yes, the 4 strategies, and this is an empirical hypothesis. As you say, I've been testing it out as throughout, for many years now, but it's open to falsification. And so I say this with, some degree of hesitation, but this is the way I'm seeing it. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but there are these 4 strategies. And the first is, well, do you have an order that you'd like me to go
Sure. I
in?
mean, why don't we go? I think this is the order in, I might be wrong about the order in the book, but here's the order that I have, and then we can go in this order. First is heroic strivers. Second
Yeah.
are socializers. Third, competitors. And fourth, transcenders. So, do we want to start with
Okay.
heroic strivers and just explain what that is, what that looks like, and maybe how we can, as we go through this, the four, any advice you have as to like one of the, for some people, it may be like, oh, that's me. For a lot of people,
Yeah.
I think it might be, is that it? Is so any advice you might have in terms of like questions to ask ourselves, tips to figure out like, is it this one or is it this one? I think might also be helpful.
Yeah. And it is helpful. It's helpful to get clarity about yourself.
Yeah, again, I just as kind of zoom, I think I wanted to go in this order. I wanted to sort of talk about mattering projects first with the thought of like, okay, now that we have that in mind, now we can start to give ourselves a lens through which we can look at our lives with the North Star of, okay, what is the mattering project that makes sense for me? And so now that we have a sense of what the mattering projects are in theory, and now we can go through each one of these different strategies, I think if we can figure out where we land on the mattering map, the projects become a little bit clearer, or the potential
Yeah.
projects could be clearer.
Yeah. And projects is used in a very open way. It's not like, "Oh, I have a project to clean out my attic," or
Yeah.
something,
Right.
as a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's existentially charged, and it'll probably continue until you die, really, as long as you keep that passion. What is the phrase that you use? The heart on fire. The Mattering project is very much about the heart on fire, right? And as long as you keep that, your Mattering project is working for you. So the heroic strive up. I'm going to start with socializers because I have found that most people seem to understand the question in terms of the way a socializer understands it. And that's another just briefly point I want to make. When I start talking to people about this, and it depends, how I broach it is very dependent on the kind of person they are. But I often can tell right away which strategy prevails in them by how they hear the question. So when I ask about mattering and what keeps you going, what gets you out of bed in the morning, what keeps you in, what kind of failure would be a failure that would really make you doubt the way you're leading your life? These are the sorts of
It's a good
questions.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, make you feel like, "Oh, it's all meaningless," I put so much effort into this, but, that kind of existential question that we would like to hide from as much as possible, that the way that people hear it often gives me a clue as to which strategy prevails because socializers hear it automatically as, "Do I matter to others?" That is what their project is about, and it might be others who we all wanna matter to others. I mean, that is what it is to be a gregarious creature, and I spoke a little bit about that. We need connectedness, we need a sense of belonging. We need to know that if we disappear from the face of the earth, certain people are going to notice and care, right? This is very basic, right? That doesn't make you a socializer, that makes you human, right? And we all care about that. But socializers sort of collapse that, there being these or at least one kind of socially collapse that, need for people in our lives into what their lives are really all about and how they justify their lives to themselves. So, the mother who really her mattering project is to bring up flourishing children. Is her flourishing. That is what her flourishing is all about. Or, romantic partners or, this sort of community members, your neighbors, my colleagues. This could be what it's all about. Interestingly, I also count as socializers because it is caring about one's mattering is mattering to others. I also count people whose mattering project is to be famous. They want to matter not to the people in their lives, but well, what is it to be famous? To matter to a bunch of strangers, which can seem strange. I know a lot of people who are famous, but I know a lot of people who really need to be famous. That is what the Mattering Project was about. And I can see it in some sense it really makes sense because, if a bunch of people are always paying attention to you, they wanna know what you wear, what you do, and surely you are deserving of your own attention if all these people find you so worthy of their attention. So it's very can be very strong, validation. And also being a member of a cult, somehow feeling that the cult leader, you matter to this cult leader who may not know you at all personally. Somebody very close to me had joined a cult in college, and she became lost to me and all of her former acquaintances and friends. And did this cult leader really even know of her existence? No, but somehow, and she had exalted this cult leader onto a higher plane of mattering and that there was this kind of trickle down mattering. And we see cults are very, very important in today's America, politically and religiously. And so, but this is also a kind of mattering to others, and some healthier than others. All of these ways can go bad for the person and bad for society at large. They all have that potential because just as 'cause it's human, and that's what human is. It can, go very bad and very well. And I actually say, and I think that I do believe this is true, it's kind of a stark, bold statement, and I'm usually a little wary of those, but that our greatest achievements and our greatest atrocities all come from the mattering instinct, from this trying to justify ourselves to ourselves. So that's socializers, and then let's go to heroic strivers. Is that enough about
Yeah, that's great.
socializers?
Yep.
Okay. And heroic strivers, they really don't care about mattering to others. They may need it in some sense to get going in their mattering project. But heroic strivers have some certain standards of excellence in mind that they want to do well by in order to reconcile themselves to themselves. And it could be intellectual, it can be artistic, it could be athletic, it could be entrepreneurial, it could be military, it could be ethical. And if you have certain mattering projects, you may need the go ahead of what I call the mattering adjudicators. I mean, for example, I wanted to be a philosopher. I had to impress my undergraduate professors, get the letters of recommendation, impress my dissertation advisor, all of these things, get published, impress the journal keepers. But I wasn't living
Yeah,
to
that
impress
wasn't the
these
point.
people.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
was not the point. The point was I wanted to further my philosophical understanding. And so I had a kind of intellectual standards that have with a touch of the ethical because it's so important to me to anything that I learn to give over to others if, to if and first of all, for them to test it, that's so important, the feedback, the criticism, which is why it took me very, very long to decide to publish this. I wanted pushback. It was like a so so those are it's the excellence itself. I should say that there's a theory of a personality psychologist. There's one theory, it's called the Murray-McClellan theory, and it's by 2 psychologists who had been at Harvard for a very long time, and now dead, that kind of maps onto my strategies, or at least 3 of them. So this is not totally theorizing in a vacuum. There is some empirical psychological research that backs it up. So so competitors really think of mattering in zero-sum terms, and it's interesting. They're the one group of people that when I start asking them questions about their own mattering, they get a little uneasy because they really hear it as my asking, do they think that they matter more than other people? Because that's what they need. They're in competition with others. And, it's I read up a lot about the psychology of competitiveness, and there are different psychologists have distinguished between different kinds of competitiveness. Some mattering projects demand that you be competitive. I mean, if you're an athlete, you must be competitive. But even among these athletes, if you read up about different athletes, some of them, their mattering really depends on their being the best. That those who do better from them, it's devastating. It's taking something away from them. And many, many athletes are not like that. It's like they have contributed to the game. Their world record will be beaten, and they celebrate that because it's somehow the game itself that matters to them. So there's so many divisions here. There was a philosopher named Jerry Fodor who died about 10 years ago, and he used to say, "The problem with the world is people don't make enough distinctions." And I think that is very true. With this, it's there are so many distinctions to be made. Because if only people make enough distinctions, we would all be happy as kings, and we all know how happy they are. Oh, he was very witty, dark wit. Anyway, so there are those who, in their field, they're very competitive. One of my favorite stories is, again, a very accomplished scientist whom I somewhat know. He got a Nobel Prize, and somebody else who knows him too had commented to me, he was happy for all of 15 minutes when that call from Stockholm came, and then he realized other people had also gotten the Nobel Prize. So, it was like such a beautiful statement to me of what it is to be a competitor, and it's very hard. It's you can never rest on your laurels, not even Nobel laurels. That this is everybody is a potential thief of your mattering, which matters so much to you. This is so and then there are the group competitors, and Frank Mink was such a one. It was his group mattered more, and his mat and when you feel this had that might be just a background assumption, it's not your mattering project, but when you feel that society is going wrong and putting these other people up and taking away from you, then it can become your mattering project, and that had been the case for Frank. Okay, on to the last, transcenders. So, transcenders really hear this question as in a religious and spiritual religious/spiritual terms. It's, "Do I matter to the universe?" It's, "Is there" this is the one way of responding to The mattering instinct, that depends on, what philosophers call metaphysical beliefs or, a belief that goes beyond the empirical, beyond space and time and what we can observe of the empirical world, that beyond the transit, beyond the empirical world, or perhaps permeated throughout it, is a transcendent being who purposefully created one so that you have a role to play in the narrative of eternity. It don't get no bigger than that. The sense of mattering. It doesn't get, and I started out life, I was born into a very religious family, and I truly felt that, believed it, acted according to it, planned my life. It was Orthodox Judaism, planned my life according to it. When when Orthodox Judaism is just permeated with so many laws, so many eating and what you do with your body, everything is just, and when I didn't do the right thing, and which is some minor little thing, ate a Hostess cream pie, I felt that the Lord of the hosts observed and was dissatisfied with me, and it was both, it was terrifying. There's no privacy, like, God is always watching. It was terrifying, but I felt like I mattered so much. I mattered to God, right? And when, at the age of 13, I completely lost my faith in that view of the world, it was a little mini existential crisis. Oh, so do I matter? What do I have to do? Like, how do I get on? What should I do with the rest of my life? But I know what that feels like. And for a long time, I am an atheist. I'm secular humanist. And I've, written about that. And I call it organized non-religion. There are so many different organizations devoted to free thought, free thinking, secular humanism, and I've got a lot of awards from them. I got the Richard Dawkins Award and the American Theist Award, and it often I feel that there's a mistake made, that people are being pulled in by very bad arguments, the God of the gaps, and if you only pointed out the fallacies, people would come over to our side, not believe. And I more and more, I when remembering, how I felt as a transgender and how many people I know who are not stupid. They're really quite brilliant, but that this is the way that they minister to their longing to matter, and it just feels right for them. And so it's not a matter of stupidity, and it's not a matter of, getting the logic right. It's there's great diversity in how we respond to this. So, some of it because of our temperaments. I would have loved to be a transgender. My life was all mapped out for me. I wouldn't have made my family upset. All sorts of things. There was community. It's a very tight community. And, in many ways, I would have loved to I couldn't. It was not my intellectual temperament. It was not my sense of freedom and potential and what I felt I needed to do to be right with me and to be able to do something I could give back. So, where we end up has a lot to do with temperament, culture, talents, passions, and just chances of one's autobiography.
Every year around this time, something shifts in how we think about money at my house. We stop thinking about last year's finances and we start thinking about this year's finances. That's why we use Monarch, because most financial apps are built around the past, showing you what you spent, making you feel bad about it. Monarch, though, is built for the future. So set yourself up for financial success this year. Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool designed to make your life easier. It brings your entire financial life, budgeting, accounts, investments, net worth, and future planning together all in one dashboard on your phone or your laptop. Feel aware and in control of your finances this year and get 50% off your Monarch subscription when you use the code Excellence. Unlike most apps, Monarch keeps you proactive, giving you a complete picture of your budgets, debt timelines, savings goals, net worth, all of it so you can make decisions that actually move the needle. Set yourself up for financial success in 2026 with Monarch, the all-in-one tool that makes proactive money management simple all year long. Use the code excellence at monarch.com for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with the code excellence. You know what's wild? Most of the sodium that we consume comes from processed foods. So if you're eating a whole foods diet and staying active, of course you are, you're probably not getting enough electrolytes, even if you're drinking plenty of water. Low energy, brain fog, muscle cramps, these can all be signs your body needs more than just hydration. And that is where Element comes in. Element is an electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you do not. No sugar, no artificial ingredients, just a science-backed electrolyte ratio that helps you feel your best. We've been drinking Element here at the show for years. And here's something super cool. Their lemonade salt flavor that was so popular over the summer has now become part of their permanent lineup. It's refreshing, tangy, and when I miss summer, as I look out the window at all this snow, it makes me a little bit happy. Mix it with water, add it to iced tea for a salty Arnold Palmer, or get creative with your own twist. Right now, you can get a free Element sample pack with any purchase when you go to drinkelement.com/excellence. That's drinklmnt, the letters.com/excellence. And if you don't love it, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Drinkelement.com/excellence. We are brought to you by Momentous, a supplement company with a relentless commitment to the fundamentals of long-term performance. On the show, we talk about training, we talk about sleep, the daily habits that drive excellent living, but there's one piece that tends to fly under the radar, and that is your gut health. When your gut is not dialed in, everything else works harder than it needs to. Nutrient absorption, energy stability, focus, recovery, mood, all of it runs through your gut. It's the quiet engine underneath everything. That's where Momentous Fiber Plus comes in. It's a complete 3-in-1 formula, soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, and a prebiotic resistant starch built to support gut health from start to finish. Clean ingredients, no artificial additives, and independently certified by NSF for sport and informed sport. If the gut foundation isn't there, the rest of your supplements and habits won't work as well as they could. Right now, Momentous is offering you up to 35% off your first order with the promo code EXCELLENCE. Head to livemomentous.com. Use the promo code EXCELLENCE for up to 35% off your first order. That's livemomentous.com with the promo code EXCELLENCE. One of the things I think you strive to do in the book is, and you mentioned it a little bit here, in terms of there's no judgment here, right? Like when you're thinking about these things, whether you hear about heroic strivers or socializers or competitors, it's not about one's being really good and one's being bad. And then, so therefore we should all be heroic strivers because we all kind of want to be a
Exactly.
hero, right? Like
Yeah,
it's not
exactly.
that. I think it's more about the uncovering of a certain kind of truth. If you can uncover that kind of truth, then you can start to line up, or at least you can start to answer the question is, why do I feel like I don't matter? Or why do I feel like there's this gap here? And
Yeah.
perhaps it might be because you're chasing a mattering project that makes sense for a competitor. But when you're really honest with yourself, you're really a socializer. And so being able to reorient ourselves, I think, is the really useful part of understanding each one of these four and trying to figure out, like, where do I live more often than I don't?
Yes. Yeah, and what is lighting me up, and it's a very person and it takes self-reflection, and sadly, but, we're living our culture is sort of driving us away from that kind of the self-reflection. I spoke to oh gosh, I just forgot his name, but the guy who came up with the idea of FOMO, right?
FOMO, really? Okay.
Patrick, and he has a podcast. We had a deeply existential conversation, but that fear of missing out is really it's a very strong force in our culture, and it's very non-self-reflective. I mean, you've got to sort of be with yourself and be trying to understand. And often we've been influenced not just, by our culture and what seems to be getting the most attention and the people who seem to matter the most in our society, but also our families. And that was certainly true for me. I have students who, their parents are academics. That is what, that's all that's striving for intellectual excellence. Well, it worked for their parents. And there's a great, I'm a parent. There's a great to live your life means you have adopted for yourself certain values, and you think, You don't just think, "Oh, these are my values." No, you really wanna think they're objective values. Otherwise, it's just as arbitrary as your own identity, and that's what we're trying to get away from. "Oh, yeah, I care about myself because 'cause I'm me, but there's gotta be something more that justifies all this self-mattering," and so we come up with our set of values, and so it's very, very natural, to wanna give it to the people we're bringing up and whom we love so very, very much. So, but, I actually just spoke to a mother last night, and she said, "I have a bunch of degrees. This is what makes my life meaningful. My kid doesn't like to read, and it just breaks my heart." And it's just, yes, that's so natural that it would break her heart, but it is, autonomy. Autonomy is an important value in human life, and our mattering project that's right for us ought to be where we meet our autonomy, where we feel our agency. I kind of think, free will is a big issue, big, but I think if it's anywhere, if it exists anywhere, it's at this meta level when I'm sort of trying to decide what I want to desire. It's, trying to figure out what it is that I want to desire. It's kind of a second order desire. And that's where if free will exists anywhere, I think it exists up on this level. But we're not gonna get into a discussion of free will, it's that'll end nowhere.
Okay, I want to be respectful of your time. On only maybe one more big question. There's so much more in the book that we didn't get to, of course. I didn't even ask you about entropy, which I was tempted to. I think that would also be a 2-hour conversation. So
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating stuff, though. My last question to you, maybe to harken back to what I opened this with, which is this idea of being a philosopher. Any advice to us for how to live or to see the world or see ourselves as a philosopher might? What does that mean and how can we do that better?
Yeah, being very open to all sorts of questions and the constant questioning going on and the constant questioning of yourself, your own viewpoint. What one is struggling for is perspective, right? The most perspective that you can, that's the thing for a philosopher that you're asymptotically trying to approach. There's this idea, in fact, of the view from nowhere, as if, the view from just the universe itself. And of course, we can't have that. We always are inhabiting our own point of view. But for that point of view to take in as much as possible, and including other people's point of view and why they have it, and maybe you ought to have theirs. And for me, the life of philosophy has also, especially since I came in from math and physics, to try to see how it all hangs together in the largest way possible. I think that's also a philosopher's dream. The philosopher's dream is how does this all hang together, and where can we find ourselves and one another within this? So this is, I don't know. That sounds very vague, but I actually think it's very human. I really, we come into this world, and I think we have three major questions, like, "Where the hell am I? What kind of world is this?" And science tells us to a large extent what kind of world this is, what kind of forces there are, and what kind of, there's matter, and there's antimatter, and there's energy, and all this stuff, and there's thermodynamics and entropy, and all this stuff, right? And this is the kind of world we inhabit. And it's good to know a little bit about that. And it gives us perspective. And is this world, does it care about me? That's a second. Is it, what's my relationship, my personal relationship with this world? Does it care about me? Is it indifferent? Is it on my side? Is it against me? We ask these kinds of questions. And then the last question that we ask is, and these are all deeply philosophical questions, is, and what am I supposed to do with this short time here? What am I supposed to do that will mean that I have not wasted this amazing opportunity I've been given and being born, being alive? And these are just three, you see them through history. Can see these three questions being asked. And I just want to end by saying that I think that these questions make us really something special. I love animals. I spent a lot of time with chimpanzees. I love chimpanzees. I love elephants. I love animals. But they don't do this justificatory thing. They don't step outside of themselves and say, "Am I worth all of this self-mattering? How do I live so that I'm not wasting my life?" I find that so there's dignity. There's a kind of dignity in that. I had always heard this phrase, the intrinsic dignity of human life. I never knew what it meant. It just sounded like bullshit to me. Now it kind of that I think about it in terms of this mattering instinct. We bring values into the world. Values exist. They can sometimes they're bad values. Frank's Mink's values had been very bad, but that mere fact of bringing values into the world and trying to live in the light of self justification just seems to me laudable, and there's some dignity in that. And it's something I have to go through. It's almost like a mantra or a yoga meditation, 'cause, you read the newspaper and you get so outraged by how people are doing bad things, right? Doing really, k working with entropy and disorder instead of against it. But I think, yeah, but they're trying to prove that they matter, and there's something in that that is reconciles me to my species and makes me feel that we all ought to judge each other with more compassion and mercy.
Mm. The book is called The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. Thank you so much for this conversation and for the book, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so very much for tuning into the show this week. Two quick things before you go. First, if you want even more from this episode, go check out the full 531 breakdown. We give you the 5 big ideas from the episode, 3 reflection questions to help you process it all, and 1 key takeaway that you can put into action right now. The link is in the show notes. The second thing, while you're there, check out the Chase Club. It's our premium membership where we include bonus content, ad-free episodes, and a brand new Chase Tracker app. Check it all out at chasingexcellence.email.